My girlfriend and I had been living in our new apartment approximately 3 to 4 months at the time of this story. For some clarification and background information, we live in a basement level unit. The one and only entrance is inside the building and down the stairs. However, there's 4 windows facing nothing but a row of shrubbery and tree line. It was roughly 9 to 10 p.m. She was at work for the evening and I had the place all to myself. Lights on and TV blasting. I was sitting in the living room planning on eating trashy and binge watching the remaining episodes of Broad City. Not too long into it, however, I heard a scraping sound from the bathroom. My first thought, a mouse? Which was the last thing we needed. So I get up and make my way through the hallway as quietly as I can to watch a glimpse of it. The closer I got, the more that I realized the scratching wasn't coming from the bathroom, but rather the window in the master bedroom. My next guess was it's simply just kids playing outside, as they tend to do. Or perhaps it was the bunny that I'd seen out there bouncing around early that morning. And even more likely, someone taking out their dog to pee. I paused, tried to hone my hearing, and only then noticed that it wasn't a sound echoing from outside, but rather scratching on the window itself. I started into the bedroom when I then noticed the sound stopped and moved to the adjacent window in the room next to it. It was a smaller bedroom that gave us the creeps as is. We never used it, there's no light source. It simply sits dark and empty aside from a few boxes of my clothing. Now, thinking back, that was probably a bad idea. I'm a small girl, maybe 5'2", 90 pounds soaking wet, but I do have a bit of spirit and a tad bit of temper. I had really hoped, upon being discovered, that whomever it was would run off. I had caught him red-handed, so I then stilled myself and yelled out, "Hey, I can totally hear you. What do you want?" The scratching stopped instantly. I waited. After what felt like an eternity, I assumed the coast was clear. I made my way to the windowsill and slowly cracked open the blinds. I don't know why I did that, because there he was, crouched, just peering into me with the widest and wildest eyes that I've ever seen on a person in my life. He was most certainly strung out on something. He told me to let him in. As shocked as I was, I almost laughed at the audacity, as if I was just going to swing open the window and let some stranger in my house. Using the remaining courage I had mustered, I tell him not so gently, "No, get the heck away from my house." He again told me to let him in, to which I then informed him I was calling the police and hurriedly proceeded to do just that. I even turned the phone to face him for added effect, hoping this act would scare him/intimidate him. Anything I could to get this man to leave. Unfortunately, it had the exact opposite effect. He was seething, raging, and practically foaming at the mouth. He drew back and then punched the window, hard, repeatedly slamming his fists and palms against the glass. The window started cracking. Blood was flinging up all over the place. I made sure to get out of there really fast, heart racing, slamming the door shut behind me. I was so tempted to run out the front door, but incredibly scared that he would just come around the front of the building. It would take no time at all for him to do that. Torn and trapped, I picked up the nearest blunt object and placed myself in between the 2 doors. I figured whichever one moved first, I'd go out the other. I still had the phone to my ear. I was urging the 911 operator to get someone here, and fast. In my panicked state, I also feared for my girlfriend who would be coming home very soon. I messaged her, warning her about what was going on. Eventually, sirens and a pounding came to the front door. I was relieved. The police had finally arrived. I explained what had happened and they searched the entire apartment and the area near the window, coming back with a set of keys that he had possibly dropped, but there was no sign of him other than the broken window. They took a sample from the blood splatter on what he left on the glass. My girlfriend came home shortly after, having left work early and calling the police herself. I'm really grateful she did. Maintenance had been notified and they threw up temporary boarding until it could be repaired. They never actually found the guy, or if they did, I never received any updates about it. Definitely didn't get any sleep that night. This happened when I was around 9 or 10 years old. My parents rarely let me home alone, but when they do, it's mostly because they have adult stuff going on, Like they're going for a relative's funeral or a visit in the hospital, something along those lines, and they don't want to bring me with them because they're scared I will act awkwardly. Here's the story when they let me on my own that one gloomy evening that scarred me for life. They told me that they'll be back for dinner, but just in case, my mom prepared me some spaghetti and told me to eat it if they weren't back home around 8:30 p.m. Right before they left, I began to do my homework in order to get rid of them so I could play my video games for 2 hours straight. I was really into my game and barely checked the time, but when I did it was already 8 p.m., and that's when my nightmare began to start. I paused the game to heat up my spaghetti in the microwave, when I then heard the interphone. I lived in an apartment on the 5th floor, and in order to unlock the main door in the ground floor, we had to use the interphone. You could unlock the main door with the keys, but my dad told me that they still planned on calling through the interphone to make sure I was sleeping or not. I answered the call, presuming it was my parents. I say hello, but I get no answer. Then I continued with, "Okay, it's unlocked now. You can come in." Still no answer. It felt really strange to me because they will always say something before coming in, but I thought they were just really in the hurry to see me. How naive I was, but things got worse. After waiting for 15 minutes, I started to realize that it wasn't my parents at the interphone because I was just on the 5th floor and it doesn't take you 15 minutes to take the elevator or even climb up the stairs. So I just unlocked the door for some random stranger. But I felt like it was no big deal because there was no way in hell some stranger is gonna guess which floor I was on. Someone started ringing the doorbell 20 minutes after I answered the interphone. I knew it wasn't my parents because not only was this person ringing the doorbell in the most horrendous way possible, but he was also knocking at the door. Things that I knew my parents wouldn't do because they had the freaking key. I was sweating and I started to switch off all the lights and I took a kitchen knife with me. Even though I had no idea who the person was, I knew that the person wasn't welcome in my home. Then the guy said,
"I know there's someone here. No need to be scared. I'm the hallway cleaner. I just want some water. I'm really thirsty."
At that moment, I was going to call my parents to let them know what was going on, but the phone was in my room and if I made a move, I'll make a noise. So I just stayed next to the main door in the dark, sweating and with a kitchen knife in my hand. He was still trying to convince me to open the door with the same crap.
"Come on, man, I'm exhausted. I'm thirsty."
But I knew he was lying. 1. Why asking for water when there's a fountain on the ground floor? And 2. I was pretty much sure that he was the person at the interphone. That's why he said,
"I know there's someone here."
Because I freaking answered him at the interphone. But how the heck he found me and which floor I was living in is still a mystery. Was he spying on me? Did he know my parents? Did he knock them out and take the keys? I was very paranoid and thinking all kinds of different scenarios. I started to cry, but after what seemed to be an eternity, he finally left. His last words are still so fresh in my memory.
"You're not a very polite little girl."
Then his footsteps faded away from the door. Even if he was gone for good, I sat down next to the door and just cried. I managed to put myself together and wipe off my tears and waited for my parents. When they arrived home, I hugged them and they kinda just scolded me for not sleeping yet, so I didn't tell them what happened because I didn't want to get scolded even more. That entire week I kept an eye on the staff cleaning the building, and yet I've never met a male hallway cleaner. Eventually I told my family about this little incident during Christmas dinner. I didn't mention all the details, but they were very surprised that I didn't tell them anything after all these years. We even had a nervous laughter after I said that I took the knife to defend myself. I honestly never thought I'd be able to laugh about that incident. As for the mystery, well, it still remains a mystery. We all discussed theories, and the more plausible scenario is that the intruder was actually one of our neighbors, because there was no other way to find which exact door and floor I was in. My parents are very friendly, so they used to talk a lot with the neighbors. I even remember that my dad used to bring me with him while visiting his neighbor friends, because they were the same age and had kids to play with. So the fact that they were out that evening probably hit the ears of a neighbor. Anyway, I feel much more relieved now telling my family that story. And to whoever that creepy man actually is, I'm really glad that you didn't succeed in whatever you were trying to do. Thank God. Just a few days ago, I was home, minding my own business and studying for an exam. I was kinda stressed out and I couldn't really focus on anything. It was midday. The doorbell rang, so I got up and opened the door. There was a man, mid-30s, average build, looked like a construction worker. He asked me if my parents were home because he needed $50 to fix a pipe. I told him no, that they're not here, and he asked me when they're coming. I told him I lived with my boyfriend, and I asked why does he need money since we just paid $35 to the building administration. He said that those are for other things and that this is for an emergency. That my neighbors had called him because on our side of the building, apparently the eaves were broken and there was water dripping on their windows. He asked to talk to my boyfriend about the money. I told him to come by later because he wasn't home. He told me to ask him when he was coming back because the problem needs urgent care right away. I closed the door, went to grab my phone, and I asked him, "Red flag. Is it a pipe or are the eaves broken?" I really wanted to ask him which of the neighbors had called him, if he could give me a receipt, how much exactly was this going to cost. But at this point I had gotten a little bit scared. I'm only about 100 pounds soaking wet. I actually look like a kid, which I guess is why he asked for my parents. Though in reality I'm 22. The way he talked to me was also weird. I don't really know how to describe it, but it had this mean/crazy vibe to it. Just so you know, he could have knocked me over with the door. I also felt incredibly stupid to have told him I was home alone, but he kept asking to talk to other people. It was my first instinct. Anyway, my boyfriend said he would be home in about an hour. I didn't tell him the whole story because the guy was waiting outside. I opened the door again. I decided I would rather talk to him than make him angry by not opening the door. Now, the door to our apartment is an old wooden door. We live in a cheap rented apartment, so I didn't feel very protected by it. So here I am, opening the door. I tell him it's going to be an hour till he comes back and that I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. He says it's alright and he'll come back later. Except he didn't immediately leave. He began to get nosy and ask a lot of questions. He asked about our rent, if we worked, if we were students, to which I barely answered. He then proceeded to ask me if I knew some other girls cute like me looking for a partner. Someone around 25 to 30 years old. That he's a nice city guy and it's really hard to find a good girl. He probably took a good 5 minutes to explain this, and then grill me for telephone numbers of girls who would not hang out with him. I tried to be as nice as I could and explained to him that I only had friends around my age and that they were all in relationships as far as I knew. He asked me a couple more times, but I just kept telling him the same thing. Eventually, he finally gave up. He had asked me if my boyfriend and I had been together for a long time, to which I replied that we've been together for 2 years. He wished us good luck and something that would translate to, "May you have a future-long marriage." He asked me which apartment is the administrator's apartment. I told him, and he finally left. I told my boyfriend all about it, and he came home as soon as he could. By this point, I felt like I was puking. I was so scared I had given away too much info while trying to keep him calm. My boyfriend immediately said it was a scam, and he went downstairs to talk to the administrator. She told him he had knocked on her door and asked her for $15, and that the girl on the 3rd floor, aka me, had sent him. She also told him that she knew he was a scammer and not to worry, just be careful. I'm really scared. It seems like he's planning a robbery, like he got into the building, he inspected the doors and chose ours because, well, it's not the best door. He asked for the rent price to see if we have money or if the stuff in the apartment is valuable. Maybe we've been tagged, or maybe asking for money really was the whole plan and sometimes people fall for it. But why choose me or our apartment? There's literally like 13 to 14 others. Weirdly enough, I feel like he was nice to me. He was very calm. He didn't try to convince me to give him the money. He tried to get my parents and then my boyfriend to be his target. He took pity on me. Nevertheless, we've been sleeping with all of our interior doors open to hear if someone's trying to break into our apartment, and we try not to leave it empty for long periods of time. We're basically living in constant fear. Living the dream. I was still living at home with my parents at the time, and it was summer, so I was home from college. I had really gotten used to the freedom of being on my own during my freshman year of college, and my parents had been having some issues establishing some ground rules for staying out late, calling to let them know what was going on and where I'd be. Probably a combo of them treating me like a child and me being irresponsible. Needless to say, when my parents told me they were going out of town for an upcoming weekend, I was really looking forward to not having any drama about where I went, when I came home, or what I did. I should also add I'm a 6-foot guy who at the time was in decent shape who could defend himself. At the time, I had never once felt afraid, threatened, or concerned about pretty much anything. I could take care of myself. Or so I thought. A few days before my parents left, the police had stopped by passing out some flyer. Now, we lived in a fairly standard lower middle class Midwestern US suburban area, so seeing the police was a pretty rare occasion. Apparently they had to go around to all of the houses in the area and provide mandatory notice of a sexual predator now living in the area after his release from prison. I didn't really think much of it after I looked at the flyer. The guy was like 50, which to 19-year-old me might as well have been in a wheelchair. Plus, he was listed at like 5'7", 140 pounds. Tiny. Male macho-ness is a pretty powerful thing when you're 19. It serves purpose too, because delusional is powerful, but then I talked to my parents. They remembered this guy immediately, and for good reason, looked concerned. I was way too little to have ever heard anything about it when it actually happened. They told me he was always a weird guy who was in his 30s still living with his mom at the time. He would wander outside in his family's backyard at odd times of the night, sometimes just sitting in the dark. Other things that were just off. My dad summed it up as, you know how sometimes the news will interview the neighbors and they're surprised about a crime? Yeah, that wasn't this guy. Apparently he went to jail for kidnapping some little girl under 10 years old, tied her up, then brutally raped and beat her. She survived, but she was found tied to a light pole. It was really messed up. Somehow though, the poor girl survived. Fortunately they caught him, but he only served like 15 years. They asked me if I'm worried and I just say, nah, he's a little old, and I don't think I'm what he likes anyways. Now, it's very important to note where this guy and his mother lived, and the layout of my parents' house. He lived on the street right behind us, but one house to the right of us if you happen to be looking out our back door. So, while our backyard wasn't directly aligned with his, it was pretty close. My parents also had a deck that was pretty large, and you could see directly into his backyard from it. Additionally, his backyard ran directly into a wooded area that ran along the side of my parents' house, but at the time it wasn't a well-lit area. It was effectively a mini forest that started maybe 15 feet from the edge of my parents' house, then went right back to this guy's house. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that this creeper is just looking forward to wandering around there again. Great. So my parents left on a Friday evening. I get home late from a friend's house Saturday morning, probably around 2:30 to 3 a.m. I pull into the driveway, and while I was obviously a little concerned about this guy, I mean really it just didn't seem like he'd be a threat to me. My parents had a basketball hoop in our driveway, and we'd often play at night, so we had a massive bright floodlight. So as I pull in, the light is obviously on and the driveway is well lit. No one around. Everything looks normal, but as I walk past our garage to the front door, I noticed a still lit cigarette butt on the ground. Now, this was weird. No one in my family smokes. I don't smoke. Literally no one in our circle of friends smokes, like at all, and it's burning. Now I'm freaking out. It starts to dawn on me that I don't have a weapon and I have no chance if this guy has a gun or a knife. I make a beeline to get inside ASAP. My hands are kinda shaking, and you never really realize how hard it is to open a door until you're actually stressed out trying to open one. I get inside, lock the door behind me, grab an old golf club that was inside for some reason, and everything is good. The dog seems normal. I turn on every light in the house and then go around checking every window lock, door entry, etc. Everything checks out. Phew. I've got the golf club down next to me. Nothing. At this point, I was ready to go to sleep, but I was still a bit wired from the rush that I just experienced. I can't remember what I started watching, probably a rerun of SportsCenter, but I just curled up on the couch with my dog on my lap. About 30 minutes go by, and I start to relax and calm down. I go to finally turn off the lights, and I doze off on the couch with my dog. Then all of a sudden, my dog just starts going nuts at the back door that connects to the deck. Not just loud barking, but straight up snarling. I'm telling you, animals are so freaking smart. I immediately grab the golf club, flip on the lights, and the lights to the outside for the deck. Now we're staring at each other through the glass door, but this guy isn't little. He's about exactly my height and maybe even taller. I'm beyond scared, and I just start screaming and holding the golf club, telling him to get the heck out of here. I don't know why I thought being aggressive would work, but he just kinda dead-eye stared at me. Then as my eyes adjusted some more, I could tell this wasn't the predator guy from the flyer. He was dressed like a homeless guy and was probably high on drugs, just wandering around or something. The guy turned around, walked down the deck of stairs through the wooded area, and then went off to God knows where. So to the random homeless guy from way back when, please don't ever return. This happened to me on Thursday, April 25th, and I still can't shake off just how terrifying and strange it was. So I was home alone and getting ready for my 12 o'clock college class that morning. I decided to open my blinds to let some natural light in. I glanced out my window to see a man in his mid-30s wearing a baseball cap roaming around my property. He had his hands on his hips and walking with a lot of weird confidence. Our yard is kind of like a cliff, and it looks over onto our 5 acres of property down below. I live in the PNW, so it's a pretty scenic view. I was really confused and thought maybe it was just a worker that my mom had hired for our renovations on the house, and he was just admiring the view. I'm a little bit uncomfortable at this point because the dude walks to the side of the house out of sight. I head upstairs to see him now roaming around my front yard and my driveway, just looking at things and checking out my house. He still hasn't seen me at this point. I call my dad and ask him if we have hired anyone to come by the house, and he says not that he knows of, and he tells me he's going to call my mom and ask her, and then call me back. I'm waiting for the call when I notice this strange dude's car. It's a white Honda with no license plates, just parked parallel to my front door. This dude still hasn't seen me and he's still wandering around, so I take this as an opportunity to remember that we have a security system and I armed it. So if he did try to break in, it would immediately alert the police. If this was some sort of professional or worker, he would have rang my doorbell or at least knocked. This guy did neither. Just then, I get a call back from my dad saying neither him or my mom hired anyone to come by today, and that I needed to call the police immediately. I went back downstairs after making sure to lock every door and window upstairs, and then called the police. I explained to the woman on the other end what is happening, and she then decides that she's not going to send out an officer, but instead gives me a number to call their emergency dispatch line, and told me to talk to them. I call the number that she gave me, and immediately I get an automated message saying,
"Thank you for calling. Nobody is available to take your call right now. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911.
Now, at this point, I'm really irritated because 15 minutes has now passed, and thus weird dude is still lurking around my house while I'm home alone, and apparently that isn't enough to warrant an emergency to the lady that I called at my local police department. I then hung up and dialed 911. After finally getting in touch with the 911 operator, I was asked a series of questions about his appearance before they would send out an officer to head towards my house. This whole thing seemed really weird to me that nobody was in a hurry to have officers come to my place when I was a younger girl home alone with a strange dude. I asked the officer if I could stay on the line with her when she finally, after what seemed like forever, alerted the police to come to where I was. She agreed and I went backstairs to check on the weird guy. He's now sitting in his unplated Honda, either listening to a radio show extremely loudly or on a phone call with someone through his car. It was a very prominent loud male voice coming from his car. Then all of a sudden I hear the tone that you usually hear when someone hangs up on you, and the operator was no longer on the phone. I was really confused when my thoughts were interrupted by an unrecognized phone number calling me. I assumed it was just the operator calling me back, so I picked it up. Instead, I was then greeted by a really creepy heavy breathing. I'm not really sure whose it was, but it really freaked me out. I hung up immediately and called back to 911. I had been pretty calm up to this point, but that one phone call put me in panic mode. I got on the phone with another operator who already knew my situation and my address before I could even explain it to her. She told me that the cops were on their way. About 20 minutes had passed at this point, and the dude's still in his car, and the cops aren't here yet. Now, keep in mind, I live in a really small town, so there's really no reason why it took the cops so long as it did for them to come down. Finally, this dude is leaving my driveway right as the cops pull in. They then stop him and ask him a few questions. A cop then comes to my door and hands me a sketchy-looking flyer, saying he was just a landscaper, and he said he had an appointment. I was really relieved and also irritated that it was just a dude that my mom had hired. That is, until I realized it wasn't. I called my mom back, and I told her what the cop said about it just being a landscaper that she hired, and that he had an appointment. My mom then replies with, "I can 100% assure you that we never hired a landscaper. We don't even need one." So yeah, that's really creepy. I don't really know what that guy was up to or what his plans were, and I'm really glad I never found out. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you have your own personal scary story, be sure to submit that to my subreddit at reddit.com/r/southerncannibal or to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new stories. And before we bring this video to a close, I just want to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Katrina T, Celeste S, Ellie S, Emily W, Heather B, Howard R, Jazzy G, Jonathan C, Joseph F, Lori J, Matthew B, Michael G, Steph L, Tammy S, Terry H, 2Eki for you, and Victor R. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it more than you know. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thank you everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always stay on.